Okay, hi everyone. This is our presentation on the Chinese writing system, so Chinese characters and their evolution. So what you'll be doing is you'll be watching a video and I'll be with you down in the bottom corner of that video. And as you're watching the video, not only are we going to be talking to you about Chinese characters, but also there's a couple of videos that are linked from within the main video. So you'll see little notes during the video that says that please click on a particular image, and that will enable you then to watch a video that is associated with what we're talking about at the time. I'll also be joined in our presentation by Chen Laoshi, who is our resident expert on Chinese characters and their evolution. Hi, Chen Laoshi.
Hi Scott, hi everyone. I hope you enjoyed the presentation.
Cool. So, forgive me, I'm reading off my PowerPoints here. All right, so we're going to talk firstly about a writing system and what that is. So basically, a basic definition of a writing system is that it is a record of speech. So English and Chinese, they have two different types of writing systems in terms of how they record language. Now, obviously, English is an alphabetic, based on an alphabet system of recording language, of recording sound. It's a phonetic system for recording, whereas Chinese characters are called syllabic logographic. And we'll explain a little bit more about that as we go along. But essentially, it means that one character represents one syllable, and we've talked about that in lectures before. So, some examples, and you'll see these on your screen there. For example, 我是学生，你好, which we've already learned, and 学习汉语. Now, we know Hanyu, we've done that from our lessons, but we haven't done 学习. 学习 means to study, so 学习汉语 means to study Chinese. So you can see how the sounds are represented by the characters, but the characters themselves don't necessarily directly tell you how to pronounce them, and that's where the system of pinyin is very useful.
Okay, let's talk about the oracle bone inscriptions. They are the earliest Chinese writing system, and the oracle bone inscriptions can be used as evidence to prove that the Chinese writing system has a history of over 3,000 years. The oracle bone inscriptions were used roughly from 1300 BCE to 1045 BCE in late Shang dynasty. The Shang dynasty was in today's Henan province, and the exact position of the late Shang dynasty was in Xiaotun village, Anyang city, Henan province. The people of the Shang dynasty had the practice to perform divination. How did they perform divination? They use tortoise shells and oxen scapulars. The first step is to have these bones processed, and then they would heat a sharpened tool made of iron probably to a very high temperature and apply the tool to the bone to cause cracks, and then someone in charge would read the cracks to tell what will happen to them in the future. And the content of the divination covered every aspect of their life, such as the weather, like would it be raining tomorrow, and the harvest. And for example, if they are going to get a good harvest this year, and about their neighbors, and about their enemies, like if they would win the war against their enemies, and about the health of the king and his family. And after the divination, the Shang people, they didn't just throw away the used bones. Instead, they inscribed on them the content of divination, including the date and the exact time they performed the divination, and the person in charge, and what they wanted to know, and even what is the result, that is, what happened later. So that's why these inscriptions were named the Auric bone inscriptions. Okay, let's talk about the discovery of the Auric bone inscriptions. There is a very interesting story behind it. You know that after the end of the late Shang dynasty, that took place in 1045 BCE, the Auric bones, they were basically buried underground for thousands of years until the last few years of the 19th century. The story has it that one day this guy, his name was Huang Yirong, and he lived in Beijing, and he was stricken ill, and he asked his servant to go to the pharmacy to fill a doctor's prescription. And do you know that with Chinese medicine, one inscription contains many different ingredients? And when the servants came back home with the medicine, and Wang Yirong had a check, and he found out that what was called the dragon bone, some characters, and he had never seen them. Wang Yirong, he was a scholar, very learned, and he knew something about the Chinese writing system and as well as its ancient scripts. But he had never seen this kind of writing style, and he suspected that it was an earlier writing script, and he was right. We now know that he was right. What he did at that time was to trace back to find out the origin of the dragon bone. Where did it come from? It turned out that the dragon bone came from Xiaotun village. The local people of Xiaotun village, and they dug out from the ground of these bones, and they thought that they were dragon bones and can be used as ingredient for the Chinese medicine. And after they dug out, they would scratch out the characters, for they thought that it would be worthless, and if you cannot try to sell it to the pharmacy and with a good price with these characters on. They don't know, or they didn't know at that time, and they were characters. And we know today, like they were the earliest form of the Chinese characters. And what Wang Yirong did after the discovery was send somebody to buy from the local people at a very high price. And then official excavation of the Auric bone inscriptions took place until the 1930s. Yes. And today we have like around 1,500 characters interpreted from the Auric bone inscriptions.
Thanks, Zhiqian. Everyone, there is an image on the screen now of an oracle bone character that's been written with a calligraphy brush in red ink. If you could click on that image now, that will open a separate web page, and on that web page you'll be able to view a video about oracle characters. When you're finished, if you could then come back to this video, and then we'll continue on with the next section. Okay, welcome back. And now Chen Laoshi is going to talk to us about the next stage of evolution, the Zhou bronze inscriptions.
The Zhou bronze inscriptions refers to and the inscriptions found on the ritual bronze vessels. And it covers a rather long period, almost 1,000 years long, roughly from 1046 to 256 BCE. During this period, the Chinese writing system experienced a variety of scripts. Actually, the practice of inscribe on the bronze vessels began from the Shang Dynasty, but at that time, people tended to just inscribe a very, very short texts on the bronze vessels, usually just include their names or just a sentence or two. It is from the Zhou Dynasty that people began to have the practice of inscribe longer texts on the bronze vessels. The content of the texts usually include the owner of the vessels and how they got the material, that is the bronze, to cast the vessels. And usually the materials were awarded by the king because of their extraordinary performance, like during a war or these kind of things.
谢谢陈老师. Next in our narrative on the evolution of Chinese characters is the fascinating story of the Qin Emperor and Qin small seal script.
Well, a very important step in the development of the Chinese writing system is what Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China, and that is Qin Dynasty, died 2,000 years ago, when he unified China. Before his unification, China, what we know today as China, was actually divided into many different states. And these different states, they had different writing scripts. And in Qin state, they used this small seal script. And it is thus named because today we use it in seal. And what Qin Shi Huang did was the use of Qin small seal script as the only writing script within the whole country.
The Qin Emperor, I guess in some ways you could say, was not a nice man. He was a very authoritarian and an extremely brutal emperor. But I guess, if you're a man in his position and you're trying to control your own kingdom plus the other kingdoms that you've conquered, you're going to be constantly facing a lot of opposition. And so I guess in some ways, brutality is just one way to ensure that the things you want to get done are done. Now he's famous for a number of things. He's famous for burning the books and for burying the Confucian scholars alive. So it's Keng Ru Fen Shu. And part of the reason he did that, of course, was because he was an advocate of change, certainly an advocate of change from some aspects of tradition. And in those days, Confucian scholars held, quite a lot of power, quite a lot of influence, and they, being traditionalist, I guess, and again, different scholars will have different views on this, but they being traditionalists, they were not as in favor of change, and so in a sense they were an opposition force to the emperor. So the emperor, being a pragmatic person, basically made it very clear that if you opposed him, he would kill you, and that's what he did to many of the Confucian scholars that opposed him. The Fen Shu was also, in a sense, a break with the past, so he burned a lot of the historical texts. He ordered them to be burned. So it was a break with the past in that sense. It was also a a way of, I guess, eliminating systems of writing or characters, if you like, that were not that didn't conform with the standard that he set. So, in fact, that's one of the things that he did, which has been lasting through until the modern era, and that is that he he decreed that there would be one basic standard of writing characters. Now, I mean, fairly broad standard, but he aimed to standardize the system of writing, and in Chinese that's called Shu Tong Wen. It's part of a well-known Chinese saying. So he united the system of writing. Now, what's interesting about that? Well, sorry, before I go on about that, he also did some other things. He actually standardized the axle widths of carts, and you may think, well, what's the big deal about that? It's kind of interesting. Just very quickly, when I was younger in Australia, when you caught the train from Melbourne to Sydney, you had to actually stop on the Victorian-New South Wales border in a place called Albury-Wodonga. And the reason was because the rail gauge, the width of the rails was different in Victoria from New South Wales. And so the carriages would go from Melbourne to the border and they couldn't go any further because the rail gauge was a different width. You had to, I believe, get off the train and get on another one, but I've also heard they did have some system for lifting carriages off the wheels, removing the wheels and then putting the new set of wheels on for the rest of the journey in New South Wales. Now that's in the modern world, and you can imagine the inefficiency of that. So over 2,000 years ago, the Qin Emperor was looking around, and many of the different states had different axle widths. So that meant that the roads were different widths. It meant that the ruts in the roads that the wheels made were different. So it made it very difficult for wheeled vehicles to go from one state to another. So being again a very pragmatic man, he basically decreed that we will make all axle widths the same, and so therefore he facilitated a much more efficient transport system, at least arguably. Right, so getting back to the unification of the writing system. So what was so amazing in my mind about what he did, and remember, it wasn't necessarily for altruistic reasons, or that he felt that this would be of a great benefit to China necessarily into the future. I mean, part of it is about political control, imposing his will excuse me, imposing his will on the states that he'd conquered. He united the system of writing. Until this day, all Chinese read the same system of writing. Now, a little bit later on, we're going to talk to you about the differences between traditional characters and simplified characters. But even despite those changes in more recent history, effectively the system of writing is the same in many aspects as it was back then. And regardless of where Chinese people are, where they come from, particularly within China, but this includes now areas outside of China where the Chinese have migrated to over the centuries and the millennia, they read the same system of writing. So when they look at the characters, essentially, now again, there's of course exceptions, particularly I think in places like Hong Kong where they've actually made up a number of characters that suits their dialect, which don't exist in the standard Mandarin. But when people read the characters, they see the same meanings, essentially. Let me just say, well-written Cantonese is exactly the same as well-written Mandarin. Okay, people will tell you, oh yes, but Cantonese. When you read some Hong Kong newspapers, particularly some of the what would you call them? The lesser quality ones, they tend to write in a more spoken style, so they do tend to be different in terms of their syntax and their grammar and those and the characters and words they use. But a quality, well-written article in a Hong Kong newspaper, basically, with the exception of some local words, reads exactly the same as it would in Mandarin. So people in the mainland can read what's written in the Hong Kong newspapers and vice versa. So what you really have there, if you think about it, and okay, you can say there's no big deal, but I think it's amazing. What you have there is what's called globalization. So in a sense, what the Qin Emperor did was he globalized the system of writing. Everyone reads the same thing, same characters, same meaning. However, since his time to this day, people still retain their local, their regional spoken dialects. So as you probably well know, Cantonese sounds very different from Mandarin, sounds very different from Shanghainese. And if you've heard any of the other dialects in China, which I think I've talked about in the lecture, or we will talk about, you'll realize they sound extremely different. So the spoken languages, the dialects, are quite different, and some of the dialects, as I think they said in our textbook, are as different as Italian and French. They're often mutually unintelligible. So if a Shanghainese person goes to Beijing and speaks Shanghainese, most Beijing people, most Beijingers won't understand it unless they're from Shanghai originally, or they have some experience down in Shanghai. And likewise with Cantonese speaker going to Shanghai and so on. So what you have there is localization. So to me this is amazing. Over 2,000 years ago, the Qin Emperor implemented a system of glocalization, where you have the global aspect of the system of writing, but you still have that local aspect of people speaking their dialects. Excuse me. All right. So this is this think global, act local. So the Chinese are a mile ahead of us. All right. So in this next slide, you'll actually see an example of what's called the Qin small seal script. So this is the kind of script that was used on imperial seals. And again, that's an interesting story, because even into the modern era in China, often when you're signing contracts or you're doing things at the bank, at least up until recent times, a signature was not enough. Not that long ago, banks would not accept signatures. You had to actually use a chop or a seal, okay, and you had to chop whatever the official document was. Now, obviously, the emperors had big seals, and they stamped into wax, and they also had the ink and so on. So this script, in a sense, was a script that worked well with a seal, which is something that needs to be carved into some kind of stone. So you can see an example there, and again, the characters still don't look very regular, not the way we're used to seeing them, not the way we're used to learning them. And if you look carefully at this example, you may actually see a couple of characters there that you'll recognize. I can see one that's Tian for sky, day, heaven. Under that I can see one which is Xia. So that's the character for. Now we learned this recently. That's the character for down or under, or in the case of 下课 to finish class. I can see some other ones there that we haven't learned yet, but you will before long. There's 介 as in 介绍, which means to introduce. I can see 景 which is the character for well, so it's like a, what do you call it, noughts and crosses grid. Some other characters, Huang, which is the character for emperor. So I guess what I'm demonstrating to you here, and I'm not an expert in ancient characters, I'm not an expert in classical Chinese, but already I can see characters from over 2,000 years ago that I can recognize. Some of the meanings may have changed a little bit over time, but essentially the basic meanings are the same. Alright, so that's the Qin small seal script.
Well, Qin Shi Huang conducted this orthographic reform within his empire, that is the use of the small seal script as the only script used within China at that time. But along with the small seal script, there was another script called vulgar script. used side by side with the Qin small seal script, perhaps for different purposes. Qin small seal script was used for the record of official documents or this kind of things, while the vulgar script, as the name suggested, used by common people. And anyway, from the vulgar script, we had the Han clerical script. This is a script used during the Han Dynasty, and its Chinese name is called Han Li. You might want to have a look at the image we provided in the PowerPoint. This is from it you can compare the difference between the Han clerical script and the Chinese script we use today. And physically, you'll find that the Han clerical script is more like square and wide, while the script used today is like square and tall. It is not that much difference. That is to say that the Chinese writing system from the Han clerical script used during the Han Dynasty until that was around 100 BC until today, that was 2000 years after, it didn't experience much difference over the 2000 years.
Okay, so what I want to talk to you now about briefly is just the situation with traditional characters as against simplified characters. Now, I'm sure you're all aware of the differences. You'll probably know that traditional script, or in Chinese it's called complex characters, they're used in places like Taiwan, Hong Kong, but also in overseas countries where there are well-established Chinese communities. Part of the reason for that, so for example, the USA, but even Australia up until say 20 years ago, where traditional or complex characters were widely used, particularly in the local Chinese media. Now, why do I say established Chinese communities? Because often in these places, the Chinese that established those communities a long time ago mostly came from the south of China. Of course, they came in a historical period where traditional characters were still used, and they've maintained that use of traditional characters even until today. So a lot of the printed press and so on, even the websites, Chinese language websites in, for example, the USA, are still in traditional characters. And if I'm not wrong, I think most American universities, tertiary institutions that teach Chinese still teach complex traditional characters. But in countries like Singapore, for example, they've adopted the simplified system, and of course simplified characters are used broadly, everywhere on the mainland in China, partly by government decree. The process of simplification, again, was an interesting one. It happened in several stages back in the 40s and 50s. I guess it was for a number of pragmatic reasons. Throughout most of history, most Chinese people have been illiterate, and of course that's got to do with standard of living and so on. And people traditionally didn't get very good education. Really, life was about survival. To be able to get a good education, you had to have sufficient wealth, I guess, to be able to withdraw from any kind of labor and focus on your studies. So Chinese characters essentially were too hard for Chinese to learn, and I guess for a lot of history they didn't really need to learn it. Now, I mean, literacy rates in China now are actually very high. They're up in the, I don't know, is it 80 or 90%? They're very high. So there was, I guess, a thought that if the characters were simplified, that it makes them easier to learn. Certainly there was a little bit of an argument for pinyin along those lines, that it's easier for less educated people to learn. There were several waves of simplification, but the final wave, which I don't recall, I think it's in the late 50s or the 60s, eventually was actually was cancelled because it went too far. And there is this big argument about, well, so much is lost if the characters are oversimplified, in the sense that, as we will see shortly when we talk about it, characters represent different objects within the world. They represent different concepts and so on. And when you simplify them, you're losing some of that history, I guess, and some of that cultural content. But the interesting thing about simplified characters is that even though, I guess, in a sense, by government decree, that's what's being used in mainland China, traditional characters are actually making a comeback. And you'll find that many businesses, particularly in their shop signs, will use, the name of the shop will use traditional characters. And the other thing is, if you end up ever doing business with the Chinese, have a look at their business cards. And you'll actually see that quite a lot of mainland business people actually use traditional characters on their business cards. And again, there's an aesthetic quality to those traditional characters, those complex characters, that some people feel are missing from the simplified characters.
Chinese characters can be categorized into different categories in terms of how they were invented. And here we will talk about these three categories. They are pictographs, and associatives, and semantic phonetic compound. And you might want to have a look at the table provided in the PowerPoint of a list of characters through different stages. There are altogether 10 of them. Okay, the first 5 belongs to the category of pictographs. By pictographs, it means that these are the characters that were invented through a sketch of the thing they were used to represent, like 人 people, person, 女 female, 子 child, 木 eye, 马 horse. And you can see the pictographic feature from these oracle bone forms. And the next category is associatives. So associatives can be divided as a category of Chinese characters that were formed with each part of the category used to represent or contribute to the meaning of the character without any indication of the pronunciation of the character. The examples given here are 林 woods, like there are 2 trees in this character, and 好 or it is read as 好 means to love. It shows that a female and a child together. And another category is called the semantic phonetic compound, and in our textbook it is termed as picked phonetic compound, and this is a category with one part of the character indicate the general meaning of the whole character, and the other part indicate the sound of the character.
谢谢陈老师. Chen Laoshi was talking about the 2 parts of the semantic phonetic compound characters. The semantic part gives you an indication of the general category of meaning, and we've talked about this briefly in the lectures before. So it's a general category of meaning, and we talked about the word for mother, mama, and the fact that on the left hand side you have the character for female, 女 and so that gives you the information that this character is associated with the general category of female. So it's not going to give you a precise meaning, but it is going to give you that general meaning category. On the other side, and it's not necessarily left-right, it can be top-bottom, and you'll see some demonstrations of that shortly. On the other side, you'll see there is the phonetic component. Now again, Chinese characters are not inherently phonetic. But I guess you could say, English alphabetical letters are not inherently phonetic. I mean, why is the shape A pronounced as A? Well, because we said that's the way it's going to be pronounced, and everyone learns that. So in some senses, some Chinese characters are like that, where people know, okay, that character is that sound. When it's then combined with a semantic component, sometimes it will retain that sound, won't necessarily retain the tone, and it won't retain the meaning because it's there for phonetic purposes, in other words, to convey the sound. Sometimes, though, the sound will change slightly, so sometimes just the initial will change, but the final will stay the same. And in other cases, the sound changes completely. So in those cases, clearly the phonetic component is not reliable. So again, it's an indicator of sound. It's not 100% reliable by any means, but you may be able to guess roughly what the meaning is. So we're going to talk now briefly about how to write Chinese characters. There are rules associated with the way Chinese characters are written, particularly in terms of the order in which they're written. Whether you start at the top and you work down, whether you go from the left to the right, there's a number of rules that you need to follow. And in this presentation, we're just going to talk to you about a couple of the basic rules. And so the first of these rules is from top to bottom. And you'll now see a slide of the character jia, which we've learned in class before. When a teacher addresses the whole class as 大家好, here the expression 大家 means everybody, but it literally means big family. So 家 means family, and the character is written starting at the top and then working down. So if you click on the picture of the character Jia now, it will take you across to another video where you'll see how the character is actually written. When you're finished, pop back here and we'll look at the next rule. Our next rule is left then right. So when you're writing the character Ren, which you should see on your screen at the moment, for example, you start on the left and then you move to the right. Again, if you click on the image of Ren, it will take you to a video that will show you how the character is written. When you're finished, pop back here and we'll do one final rule. The final rule that we're going to talk about in this presentation is the outside then inside rule. So there are characters where you start on the outside, you write that first, and then you do the inside. So on your screen now there is the character guo, which we've done in class before, part of the word for 中国. We've also learned 美国, 英国, and 法国. So once again, if you click on the image of guo, you'll see a video on how guo is written, and it'll demonstrate the outside first, then inside. The character guo is also good because it also demonstrates a combination of a couple of rules. So outside, and then when you go inside, it's top to bottom, and then it's left to right, and then close at the bottom. Have a look at the video and then pop back here and we'll continue on. Welcome back. Okay, so finally we're just going to talk briefly about Chinese calligraphy. So calligraphy has been considered as a high-level art form for literally thousands of years, and it requires years of hard work to achieve. So we're not, I'm sure most of you are familiar with calligraphy. We're not talking about just writing characters in everyday life with a pen or pencil or a brush or whatever. We're talking about what is essentially a very high art form. In fact, there are a number, all throughout history, but even in recent history, famous calligraphers, their works are actually worth a lot of money. So for us in the West, we treat calligraphy as something that we use when we're doing a wedding invitation or a birthday card, something like that. It's never really been considered as a form of art. You could argue historically with the Bible. Back when the Bible was copied by hand by the monks, quite often they would start a new scripture or a new gospel with the first letter being, beautifully drawn, you could argue that is at the level of a work of art. There's no question. But in the modern world, we don't really view Western calligraphy of English alphabet or whatever, as something that you'd be really willing to pay a lot of money for. In China, it is definitely something that people have a huge appreciation for. Not everyone is into calligraphy, but you'll find a lot of Chinese people are into calligraphy. They are able to pick what is good and what is not so good. And it's something that they have the ability to really appreciate, whereas I guess from our perspective, because it's not our native language and it's not our native writing system, it's very hard for us to appreciate it. So what I thought I would do is, you'll see hopefully now a picture there of a gentleman writing some calligraphy. What I'd like you to do is to click on that, have a watch of that video, and that'll give you a good idea of not only how the character is written using a calligraphy brush, and you'll be able to see how hard it is to master that. You'll notice that his hand is not actually resting on anything. He's writing with his hand in the air. That takes a lot of muscle control, a lot of practice. But the other good thing about the video is that it also demonstrates some of these different stages of evolutions of characters that we've been talking about tonight. So click on the picture there. It'll take you to a separate web page. Have a look at the video and then come back. I'll be waiting for you. Okay, welcome back. Welcome back. How was that? It's pretty amazing calligraphy. So if you get the chance to go to China or Taiwan or anywhere like that to study, you can actually do calligraphy courses. I'm sure you could probably find someone here to teach you as well. It's a fantastic, hobby to have. So, to wrap up, we actually have a quiz at the end of this. So what I'd like you to do is, when you finish watching this video, to go back to the Moodle web page for your unit and to complete the quiz on this week's cultural presentation. And just to help you a little bit along the way, you should be now seeing the 5 questions that we've set up for this week's quiz. So I hope you've enjoyed the presentation. If you have any questions about Chinese characters, their evolution, their structure and so on, please feel free to talk to us. Dr. Chen Lao Shi, is an expert in Chinese characters, so she'd be more than happy to talk to you about it. And certainly we'll be talking about Chinese characters and so on in the classes throughout the semester. But hopefully we've given you a bit of an appreciation of this amazing system of writing and the culture and the history behind it. All right. There's some further reading that's here. I'll put that further reading also on the Moodle site so that you can actually copy and paste. So if you're interested in any of this sort of stuff, the stories behind the calligraphy, behind the evolution of the characters, the dynasties and so on, there's some references there for you to go and have a look at. Okay, thank you all for your patience, and we'll see you in class.